Good afternoon and welcome to Safety and Health Expo Connect 2021. This is the fourth of 5 live webinars, one taking place each day this week. My name's Ian Hart and I'm the editor of SHP. If you've missed any of the other live sessions for the first few days of Safety and Health Expo or Workplace Wellbeing Show Connect, don't worry, they are all available on demand within the platform until the end of July. In this session, sponsored by iHasco, we're going to be discussing what to do if you've got a culture of compliance or non-compliance or pockets of non-compliance within the workforce. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Fuller from My Compliance Management, Michael Brown from Citation, and Alex Wilkins from iHasco. And in a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panel to briefly introduce themselves. Before we get onto that, I'd like to remind you that this is an interactive panel discussion, so please do get your questions into the panel as you are watching, and I'll try and put those, as many of those to the panel as I can during the session. You'll find the Q&A box in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Right, let's make today's panel. Chris, do you want to start with a brief introduction, please?
Hi there, yeah, my name's Chris Fuller. I'm the Sales Director for My Compliance Management. We're a health and safety software tool.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, I'm Michael Brown, the Health and Safety Content Manager at Citation.
Thank you very much. And Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex Wilkins. I'm Head of Business Development for iHasco. We provide an online training, provide online training courses for health and safety and compliance.
Great, thank you very much. Michael, let's start with you then. What advice do you have for people that might have a culture of non-compliance or pockets of non-compliance within the workforce?
Goodness, well, yeah, as part of the consultancy role that I've held previously, you see quite a bit of it when you're walking around. And typically, I'd always advise people to, if you think or suspect that you've got a bit of a culture of non-compliance, have a look and see if there's any signs around. So one of them typically that I always used to see would be things like guards missing on equipment, and risk assessments, all looking really wonderful, absolutely great, but none of the employees have ever seen them. And just general things where people have tried to make do and mend. And quite often when I used to be on these visits, people would sort of say, oh, I've told the employees about that. And you think, well, actually, have you listened to why they're doing it? Your guards being removed is quite a typical one that I used to find where perhaps they've been removed, but it's due to the fact that the machine's broken and the culture's not there to actually say, well, look, you know, this has been broken for ages. I've told you, but nothing's ever done. So quite often you see that there's that sort of missing two-way street. So the way to sort of start addressing that is to put a plan in place. So you're going to hear me talk about plan, do, check, act, and adjust as well. So review and adjust. So really put a plan together, you know, look at what you're going to tackle. So think about your communication. Make sure it goes both ways. So if you've got a number of employees, you might want to set up something like a health and safety committee in order to try and talk to them. Doesn't have to be a physical meeting. You could do it online via WhatsApp, via Zoom. You can even have things like online forums, for instance, where people can talk as they're going through and you've got that live sort of question and answer session. I would also have a schedule so that people can hold you to account and you can also hold them to account as well. So work out when you're going to communicate with them. So have regular meetings or have regular updates. So if you're collating statistics, for instance, near misses, things like that, make sure you regularly feedback what was done and make sure that you've got a system in place to keep your workers informed. And the other thing is to feedback what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, and can the workers visually see things being dealt with in the workplace. And make sure you keep your workers involved. And by that as well, I include the board and senior management. It's really, really crucial that this is led by example. So I would expect in a good organization, people know who the senior team are, they know that they can approach them with things, and it's open and honest and transparent. So make a plan would be the main thing. After that, start implementing things. So look at training your staff. So, the others on the webinar today, so Chris will definitely be talking about this at some point too. So train your staff, give them high quality training, make sure it's relevant to the work as well, make sure it's signed off, and make sure that your staff are actually happy with what they've been trained in. And I'd also consider your management in that too. So you need to coach people to have these health and safety conversations. So, listening out for ideas, making sure that they're documented, raising them, praising people where they've had a good idea for an improvement, and just generally trying to make sure that people are involved and they're comfortable and that they feel they can escalate things if they need to. The other thing, talking about coaching managers, consider giving them some health and safety training so that people at every level know what their responsibilities are, in law as well. And then feedback as well. So get your ideas, get the feedback and the information together from your employees, and take that upward to the board and see what you can do to improve things. So it's all about two-way communication, really, is the main thing on here. So once you've got that up and running, have a look at your progress, feed back to people. If it's that you're working in a machinery workshop, for instance, and you've got employees that have said, we're concerned about this, talk to them about what's being done. Perhaps have a nice transparent timeline or a Gantt chart or something up on the board, just so that you can have a look and think, right, what have we done this month? Where are we? And people can again ask openly what's being done about this. The other important thing is that if you involve your workers in the risk assessment stage, so going around with them in the workplace, they will probably suggest controls to you that you might not have thought of. So again, it's about praising those up, implementing them, and then you can hold people to account if they don't comply with them. And really, acting on it and then adjusting. So have a look at what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, adjust your documentation and your risk assessments and your plan, and then feed the results of that back to your employees. So again, I know I keep talking about this, communication is absolutely key here. So make a transparent plan, carry it out, stick to it, and feed back where you are with your employees and get their involvement and their ideas. And just really try and make sure that, people are actually on board. It isn't always easy. Sometimes you will get employees and managers as well that aren't particularly compliant. So it's important that you explain to them, why it's important. Why are we doing this? We want you to go home safe. We want to make sure that your family, don't lose a family member at work. And we also want to make sure that we protect the business as well. So other ways of doing that could be to independently investigate things like near misses. If you've got a culture where perhaps people don't want to come forward and they're not complying, and sometimes people say, if so-and-so investigates, they just want to get rid of me. So try and be open and transparent in everything that you do. And then really, if there is an employee that's being particularly dangerous, or a manager, take action immediately to rectify that. And if you need to, if you do keep having these conversations where you've tried to nurture it along, consider involving a human resources professional at that point, because you might need a bit of help. There will always be, unfortunately, people that just don't want to participate. And sometimes really, you will need to make a decision. Do you want to bring them along with you or not? And the same can be said with managers as well. So a lot of workplaces, you've got workforces that have got really good ideas on how to improve safety and how to improve the culture and what they want to do. And the amount of times you hear, I've told so-and-so about that, they don't ever do anything. So consider having things like anonymous feedback boxes where employees can, if you like, skip the management stage out, they can go directly to a safety representative. You could again have a safety committee where people can go to them as well. So there are multiple routes of raising concerns if you need to. And again, senior managers and directors need to lead. So if the work's unsafe, they should stop it, and they should be able to go up and say, look, we could continue with that, but it's risky. I've therefore stopped it, and this is what we're going to do. So again, with all of this, don't be afraid as well. If you do have a manager that doesn't see the value, again, you might want to involve an external human resources consultant or something like that, just to get some advice on what to do and how to address it. But generally, communicate with your workforce, involve them at every stage, and be as honest and transparent as you can be about what you want them, to do. Plan your journey out and try and bring them along with it so they can see progress being made. I don't know if any of the others want to come in and just join in, but I'm sure, Chris, you've got something. You look like you're desperately wanting to hop on.
Just wanted to reinforce that your communication is absolutely key and critical. We've found a lot of our customers where pockets of non-compliance come from either a high turnover of staff or where someone's just been appointed the role of health and safety manager, probably with not a lot of training, just as the MDs or the board level do not want the responsibility, so they pass it down to somebody else. So that communication, the understanding of I need to upskill myself to know what is there, and feeding that back to the management. That's what I'd say on that one.
I think you're absolutely spot on there, Chris. The amount of times I've been places, and again, it's the health and safety people not always 100% sure. They've been given the job, they've not been given any training, and that's why I say that, like, you've probably been in places where they've got fantastic risk assessments, and you walk into the workplace and you think, that doesn't reflect what I'm looking at here. Have you actually spoken to the people? I don't know, Alex, did you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I do, and I think I'm going. I think you've both hit the nail on the head with communication. But what really sticks out for me as well is the fact that you need your staff. You need to empower and encourage your staff to come forward when they spot issues. I think a lot of people will be in a scenario where maybe the risk assessment, and you use broken machinery as a good example, Michael, and they don't want to raise that because they don't want to be the one who's spotted the issue and raised the issue, but actually we need to be empowering and encouraging staff to come forward with them issues, because that's the only way we're really going to minimise the risk, is by making sure communication both ways is there and that staff are not discouraged from coming forward with any sort of concerns or issues they raise with their day-to-day work. So yeah, just echoing the communication side of things, and I want to really say about empowering staff and giving them that encouragement that it's okay to come forward.
How do you go about that, Alex? Well, if you're getting pushback about changing culture or trying to implement a new culture, and you're communicating the best you can, but you're still getting pushback from employees, what kind of tips have you got for overcoming that?
I think you need some champions, and Michael said about a committee. That committee can be full of staff who are doing a day-to-day job as well, and I think that's a really good example of how to have a group of individuals who a staff member might not go to their manager, but they would go to their friend who's part of the health and safety committee, and they would raise the issue to them, who can feed it back. I mean, there's a lot of ways we can do it. I mean, in terms of actually building champions and committees within the business that people are not afraid to talk to, I think it is a very strong way to go about it.
I think, yeah, Alex, you're right. I mean, we've all heard, even if it's not related to safety, we've all heard managers or senior people say, we tell the employees to do this, they just don't do what they're asked. You go to speak to the employees and they go, we would do that, but we've mentioned this problem and they've never bothered to do anything about it. Yeah. And that gives the impression that the other side doesn't care. So I think you're right, by sidestepping that slightly and having people that people can go to, all the anonymous boxes, or I've even heard some companies use SurveyMonkey, which I thought was a great idea. Obviously, there's probably some data issues there that you might need to think about, but, it was a very good way of them going, but we've taken staff out of it completely, so we now get from the horse's mouth what people are concerned about. And, it helps then just sort of move things along. If you've got those lines of communication, it's a bit crude at first, but then if you can start to feed back and show your progress and where you're going and what you've done, and people seeing things moving and changing and that they've suggested, it always helps. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat, I think the phrase goes, but it all seems to come down to communication, really.
Yeah.
And Chris, we've obviously seen that whilst it's been a terrible experience for all, COVID has brought health and safety to the fore and perhaps made the role of health and safety practitioner even more important within organisations.
Yeah, certainly.
Has it created an opportunity to strengthen safety culture? And it's just weird to talk about it as an opportunity with such a tragic thing like a pandemic, but what has it done to benefit?
Well, I think you'll all agree that COVID-19 has had some effect on our businesses over the last year or more. For some, it's been quite catastrophic, and for others, especially in our software and technology sector, it's actually been rather positive. What Michael was saying there about recording things, technology and software has always been around, and it's getting better and better. So, SurveyMonkey as one example, but there are plenty of tools out there that allow to capture that information. And especially if we'll be working remotely, it's proven even more important. But it's certainly brought health and safety to the forefront of people's minds. PPE has been a daily occurrence in the news, and we've all had to do things HSE professionals have been trying to enforce for years. The terminology and language which is spoken by health and safety professionals has now become more mainstream, and it's certainly put health and safety on the map on a global scale. Most people, I do say that quite loosely, have developed a greater general awareness of safety and health precautions due to COVID, but we've all had to make changes to accommodate new safety measures and processes. For example, home working has now often involved a risk assessment carried out by people who had probably hardly heard of a risk assessment in the past. Each day, our employees and your employees have been assessing risks, not just at work now, but in everyday life, just going to the shops or filling up their cars. They've also been putting controls in place to mitigate against the risk of coronavirus, and many of them probably aren't aware that that's what they're doing. So we're beginning to start that terminology, that language. We you know, people are aware of it now, and we need to start communicating that over to them. So during this time, e-learning has also become quite the norm. And it's probably been the only way to deliver any form of training to those outside of the normal working environment, giving many an opportunity to upskill and improve awareness even further, either furloughed or still working. But for most of our customers, as I just said, technology has been the real turning point to strengthening their safety culture. The ability to record, update and track their health and safety compliance from the home office or the road has proven essential over the last 15 months. It's also driven us to explore new technologies like Zoom and Teams, which has now become an everyday occurrence, especially in my life anyway. And these new ways to communicate face to face with a much wider audience safely should certainly be encouraged. And the thing I've highlighted for myself here was good communication is key to a strong safety culture. Speaking with one of our customers last week, a recently appointed HSEQ manager, they said that their purchase of our software was to help build a new, more accessible management system to reinforce and build on a slightly wavering safety culture within their organization. The key for them was top-level buy-in to their beliefs in modernizing their approach, putting accountability and responsibility to the entire workforce, using mobile apps at a time where their staff are already buying into NHS apps, SharePoint, and other remote working software. But unfortunately, with vaccines and a route out of lockdown slightly delayed, people have started to lapse and drift away and maybe get bored of some of these controls they're using. I think some of them stopped wearing masks, stopped washing their hands, even using sanitizer. So unfortunately, I think if you haven't already, the time to strike is now, before it all becomes yesterday's news. And those of you who struggled before to build a good, solid safety culture, may find it even harder now.
Alex, what would you say in terms of, Chris touched on risk assessments there, and obviously we talked about communication, and we'll come on to communication a bit more later on, but how challenging has that been to carry out risk assessments and to ensure compliance when everyone's not working under the same roof?
It's challenging. I actually complete risk assessments for our business, and it's challenging to manage the risk of people you're not speaking to every single day whilst they're working from home. As a business, we haven't furloughed anyone here throughout the whole pandemic. So people have been working from home throughout. And there's a lot more risks, not just to physical health, but mental health working from home as well, which has become a bigger part of risk assessments, is assessing people's mental health, how they're dealing working with home, anxiety, their resilience. I mean, there's a lot of areas around mental health which have become a big part of risk assessments. Not just
you hit the mental health there, especially, Alex, has been a forefront of most people's minds, and everyone will be locked down due to COVID, not had much human face-to-face interaction other than their four walls and whoever they may live with, the cat or dog. So you're right, mental health has certainly been forefront, and risk assessments to include that is quite important. I think it's something that needs to change and continue to change as well, because I don't think it's done enough.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's trying to strike the balance, isn't it? You need to try and manage people's mental health while feel like you're not trying to micromanage them, trying to stay in contact on a regular basis whilst not overwhelming the individual. It's finding the balance, which is difficult from a manager's point of view and from an employee's point of view, vice versa. So
it is tricky, because you don't want to come across as sort of invading the privacy, but then you may have employees that you look at and you think, I know that you're not behaving the way I expect and that I know you to be. I feel like I need to intervene, but how do I do it? I mean, we've got access to an employee assistance program. I think we provide one actually as well, which people can log into. And we saw quite a few people start to access that actually during the pandemic as well. Even our own internal things, you can see the numbers, but you can't see anything else. But actually, we talk about that openly because it's important. It's important. Me saying this might mean that someone else goes, do you know what, actually, I do need a bit of help. That's okay. I think it's around keeping that communication open. And again, you're right about the risk assessments. The visits I've done lately, and I've said, have you got home working employees? And they go, oh, yes. And I say, have you done any checklists or risk assessments? And they look at me as though I've grown a second head. And it's one of those odd situations where you're at work but you're also at home. So there's, and the guidance from the health and safety executive is getting a bit better, but it's still a little bit fuzzy around the edges. One of the ones I seem to get quite often is people ask about electrical testing and stuff like that. Is my employer responsible for doing the fixed wire testing in my house? No, but they could probably pat test your laptop and the display screen equipment risk assessments as well, and being able to manage that remotely has been quite a crucial thing. But again, there's plenty of solutions for that as well. But yeah, it is difficult. It's a whole new area, and there's the whole media buzz at the moment, isn't there, as well, about people working from home forever, which I don't know where they've got that from, because I certainly haven't seen anything from the Home Working Review officially yet. But there's going to be ways we can help people manage it. But it's food for thought. Yeah,
it's very true. I think you touched on a good point now, actually, the DSE risk assessment. Now, you can do that virtually very easily. There is tools out there. We provide one. I'm sure other companies provide one as well.
We do.
But the difference is you're not seeing whether they're taking that information in their day-to-day role because they're working from home. So you're giving them the information. They're coming back saying they're okay, but you're not actually seeing that happen because you're not seeing the people every day. And I think for me, that's the concern, is that although everything seems great, you never really know.
I think one of the biggest challenges that health and safety practitioners have in general, and again, this could be improving as a result of the pandemic over the last 18 months, but we've touched on it a little bit already, but Michael, what tips have you got for getting board level buy-in to roll out health and safety initiatives that you know are important?
Oh, goodness. I think really a lot of it comes down to making sure that the board are aware of what their duties are. So, informing them that they do have duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act, legal duties. They've got things that they legally have to do and have to pay for. So you're taking engineering again, if you've got cranes, they have to have a thorough examination done. That costs money. You have to have access to competent advice. There is a number of different things that people have got duties to. So again, it will be educating people about what is required. And I think also just making sure they understand the potential costs of non-compliance as well. So the legal ramifications, the moral ramifications, and the reputational damage as well that can face a company. And also, there is a good case for compliance. Your workforce generally will be more engaged, happier. You may see staff retention going up if they feel like they're being looked after. So there's quite a few benefits there as well to make people aware. I think the best thing that I would recommend you do, if you've got a board that needs a bit of movement, a bit of encouragement, is bring them data. So if you've got near misses that you're recording in the workplace, so things that had the potential to cause harm but didn't, or near hits, some people call them, then bring that data along, because it will help you highlight trends and then relate it to things that could trigger another sort of response. So some area that they're concerned about. So it could be that you notice that there is a particular machine or something you've got that's a bit old, a bit leaky, people keep slipping over, or it keeps breaking down and people keep on altering it. That sort of thing. If you have a near miss record that says, we've had a number of stoppages there, so-and-so has nearly injured themselves 3 times on it, you might, in a situation, they might go, oh, so what? It's been like that for 30 years. If you then turn around and say, if that person is taken unwell or injured and they are off work, that's it, we have to stop, and we might have an investigation, which is chargeable, and we will suffer reputational damage. It helps join the two together. It becomes more of an integrated part of the business and what you need to do. So also try and offer solutions. So turn up and say, look, we need this. However, we can do this. It may cost that much, and put the decision up there. But they should be very aware that if they're being made aware of these items, if they're being made aware of health and safety issues, that they probably ought to act on them. Well, they definitely ought to act on them. And also, if they've been made aware and they choose not to do something, there's serious ramifications there for them as well. So there's a number of sort of ways of doing it. I would always say bring the data and make it relatable to the business as well. But again, board level buy-in, best thing they could ever do is actually spend time with the workforce and getting involved and being visible and being seen. People are going to be a lot more willing to start doing new health and safety procedures and new sort of steps if they feel they've got that buy-in from the top.
Alex, obviously as a training provider, you must you must see that for some of your clients all the time when maybe a practitioner wants to implement training within the business and actually they struggle to get that buy-in. What do you say to those people?
It's really difficult because we've had many clients who have purchased our training, but the ones that are most successful, the ones that ask the board to do the training as well, because they're leading by example. And if you can see, if you're a member of staff and you can see your board are doing the training that you're doing, you're much more likely to do it yourself. And I think it's getting that message across to the board is that you've got to lead by example. And there's a lot of good courses out there which explain what Michael was speaking about the cost on a business. Particularly an IOSH directing safety course really gives that message across to the board of why their buying is so important to protecting the staff and creating that safety culture in a workplace, because it all starts from the top. If you can start it from the top and let it filter down, people are much more likely to follow suit and follow your lead by completing training, completing or reading risk assessments, complying with safety, feeding back their issues. I mean, going back to the point where we were talking about pockets of non-compliance. I mean, if the board's got buy-in to that, then you're more likely to get the feedback back from staff as well. So it's the benefit, it's the what's in it for them from a board level. That's what we need to get across, because if they can understand that, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to buy into leading the culture in the business.
Chris, on a similar theme, Chris, on the theme of training, and bring you back in here. How do we make the most of training and ensure that it's not seen as just a tick box exercise?
Yeah, okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say the board level, the biggest thing for any board is that return on investment as well. So demonstrating that the cost of training, what they're going to get out and showing them value of it. Before we moved on to the next one, just return on investment is absolutely key. So unfortunately, there will always be some people who don't value or appreciate training, and they will always see it as a tick box exercise. I was actually on a building site quite recently where I said that, regarding someone needed some training, and they just looked at me and said, "Don't worry about that, mate. It's we don't need to do it here. The boss just ticks it in the bottom off anyway." So it was quite a shock. So I've even had this conversation with some very senior board level individuals who do share that view, and luckily these are now very far and few between, and they are getting rarer. But it still doesn't stop people using the phrase tick box exercise, and unfortunately it's still quite a common expression. So the only way to change this is to embed training as part of the safety culture. I think we've already said about quite a few things regarding that culture and that communication. The focus of training must change. It currently competency and outcome only. It should be competencies as stepping stones along the pathway of developing as a professional and individual. And again, it's communicating that difference as we're not just doing this to get a certificate, we're doing this to better ourselves, to improve what we do, improve the processes within our organizations, no matter whether it's right at the bottom or right at the top. Training should also be very, very relevant to the role or task. I think Michael touched on it earlier. No matter what type of training you intend to use or deliver, it needs to be applicable to that individual. If we're just training for training's sake, then that is how it will be perceived. Training should form part of your health and safety management system and be recognised from the top down as an integral part of the business. It can be a challenge, but getting board level buy-in is, as discussed by Michael, essential to demonstrating to the workforce how important it is for the business and for individuals themselves. Again, technology is at the forefront of changing the perception of a tick box exercise, which can and does go wrong if not properly managed. Take both our systems, I don't mean to name drop, but iHasco and My Compliance, with such great content which is readily available and easy to distribute and just as easy to undertake the training. Why shouldn't we provide as much of it as possible? But this could easily lead to training for training's sake again. Obviously, there'll be mandatory training your employee will need to do to function and to meet regulatory requirements. But beyond that, my personal thoughts are be careful what you do ask of your teams. Involve them in what training they feel they'd benefit both them in their role and in their personal advancement and development. I'm sure most of you already do this, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but you'd be surprised how many managers just assume they know the roles better than the people actually doing them. And again, earlier mentioned as well.
I think, like Chris, just to touch on that, that links perfectly into what I was saying earlier about risk assessments, where a manager's done them beautifully and you go in and it just does not reflect what's on the paper.
Very pretty, but not a lot of content, yeah. Exactly, and it is a fine line between under and over training as well. In my eyes, people do a very bare minimum to meet the regulatory requirements, but again, there's then no further advancement. But we believe training is just part of one part of health and safety compliance, and it's part of that bigger picture. It is a very important part, granted, hence why we partner with IHASCO. But we believe managers should have access to so many tools, whether that is advice externally, whether it's software, whether it is training. So when you can provide your workforce with access to software to enable them to improve what they do, they start to see the bigger picture too, and it's not just ticking boxes.
Let's bring you back in here, Alex, and talk a little bit again around training and upskilling, and how do organisations go about encouraging people that want to upskill, and how has training been affected by the influx of remote working?
I mean, to encourage people to upskill, particularly in health and safety, I mean, it's the content's got to be available first, and at the moment it's difficult with the only real option being online at the moment. I mean, I've always been a fan of kind of a blended learning approach, where you do some sort of face-to-face training, some sort of online training. That's always been a belief that I follow by. But I mean, to actually get people to want to upskill, it is to make sure the quality and the relevance of that training is to a standard where they're actually learning from it. Because if someone's not learning from a training course, or they're not learning from a training you're delivering to them, or they're not taking anything away from it, then it goes back to being a tick box exercise, and people won't want to upskill, they won't want to develop because they feel like they're just ticking a box. So you need to deliver content in a relevant and an engaging way, to ensure that the staff actually learn and they can take into practice what they learn in that training session. And again, I'm going to say again, what's in it for them? They need to understand why they're doing the training. If they don't understand why they're doing the training, then we'll go back to being a tick box exercise again. They need to understand what's in it for them, why they're doing the training, and giving examples of situations where training has been beneficial. That type of training has been beneficial to help a business or help an individual within a business. It's a good way to get people to understand and want to learn more.
Also, the consequences as well, Alex, of not being fully trained in the role. Especially when you've got some very high skilled members of the public out there, and engineering example again. The people have to have the right level of training. Otherwise, they may not act safely, and then they could cause themselves damage or others damage. And we don't want that, do we?
It's so true. And I remember I was reading an article around a fire that happened in a premises. I can't remember where it was, but the whole article was focused around the fact that there was a fire, but there was no sort of emphasis on the fact that everyone got out safely because they've been trained correctly. And I think that's a key message there, because if we're saving lives by delivering good training, that's going to make people want to upskill and make people want to continue to develop their understanding and want to develop their knowledge in particular areas, in this instance, health and safety.
I think one other important thing. Oh, sorry, Ian. No,
you can come. I'll throw this open to the group, and then you can come in, Michael. But do we think that's face-to-face training is going to be, so we're going to see a return to face-to-face training in order to upskill workers, or is virtual training here to stay moving forward?
I mean, actually, that feeds in quite nicely to what I was going to say. Just to pick up on a point that you made, Alex, just now about training and pitching it at the right level. I think a lot of the time we forget that actually training is continuous, if you're doing it right. So a lot of the time you get toolbox talks, there's the sort of team briefings, things like that are done. You've got induction training. I think a lot of that, and there is, and let's not forget, there is a whole tranche of people that are still working face to face. And they have been, a lot of them are still doing toolbox talks, are still having briefings. So training is much broader than simply a sit down sort of session. Again, I think we will probably see a return to at least some face-to-face training, particularly for things like first aid and stuff like that, where you really do want that hands-on training more. But again, I think as with the working from home and working in the workplace, I think we're going to have much more of a hybrid approach in future. And there's systems like ours and Chris's and Alex's that will deliver that.
think it's that blended approach that Alex, I spoke about. It will return. I don't think you can replace a classroom, so to speak. Coming from a training background as well, I think it's very, very important to see the whites of their eyes. Although we've done a lot of training over things like Zoom, where it is a little bit more reactive to what's going on in within the person, as opposed to just an online course. I think there is definitely a place for e-learning, and I think people have rediscovered that. And I think the quality of courses out now is absolutely fantastic. And I think there will be a bigger place for e-learning than there ever was, and I think that will continue to grow. But I still don't think you replace face-to-face. My wife was on a first aid course literally the other day. Came back with a little plastic mask and doing the CPR. You can't teach that online, but you can teach the fundamentals, but not the actual, physical side of it.
Just before we move on to the next point, I'm going to bring in another question from the audience here, Alex. I'll throw this one over to you. Kind of touches on the point that we're talking about now and the previous point, but how would you advise getting senior buy-in for upskilling of maybe ops managers or other areas of the business where health and safety isn't necessarily their full-time role?
To get senior buy-in and to upskill them, I mean, it goes back in, I keep saying it, it's kind of what's in it for them. It's saying that having that level of understanding of health and safety is going to decrease the chance of an accident happening in your workplace. And I think Michael used the example earlier of using return on investment as an example, and saying that this level of training for our senior staff, whether it be a managing safety course, whether it be a level 6 course, that level of advanced training for them senior members of staff is going to decrease the chance of an accident happening, which will decrease any sort of costs implemented onto the business. But what it's also going to do is it's going to increase that safety culture as well, because you're going to have more people that your staff can go to with issues and have that communication level with, where they can speak to openly about any concerns they have.
Or just send them the link to the HSE prosecutions page and show them how many of those have been from lack of training. Yeah.
So if you run out of carrots and you have to use the stick. I think the other thing, just to add on that, is you're then going to increase the competency as a level in the organisation. So you're less likely to get, or hopefully less likely to get, that sort of complacency of health and safety is that person's job. It's more a sort of, you'll have people walking around the workplace who are able to actually go, do you know, I know I'm not that department's manager, that doesn't look right, who might actually feel more empowered to make an intervention. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to it.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, so I want to kind of move on to the final point. And we've just talked about communication a lot, and it's come up a lot during this presentation. But Alex, I want to talk to you a little bit about engagement and how you go about getting engagement from the workforce around compliance, and any tips for increasing that engagement if you're struggling to get them to engage.
There's a couple of tips we can use, and I mentioned our case studies earlier, and I like obviously the benefits of, rather than celebrating, or rather than noticing, the negatives, celebrating the positives in the business. So, I mean, health and safety has been seen for a while as being kind of reactive. People generally do something when something's happened, rather than being more proactive and approaching it in a proactive manner. And I think rather than showing what we've done to prevent something happening again, we should be celebrating that we've putting measures in place to make sure we don't have an accident here and don't have an accident there. And it's going to communicate a message across to your team that you're taking this seriously, and that you're finding ways to make sure your workplace is as safe as possible. And it's just being proactive is my main point there, is pushing forward proactivity to the forefront of your mind when you're talking about health and safety, rather than seeing it as a reactive, how do we deal with this scenario that's happened, more of a how do we prevent this scenario from happening.
Do we think communication has improved? I mean, it's obviously more challenging, perhaps communicating remotely, But has it almost, the pandemic and remote working almost made people try harder to communicate and actually set more regular meetings than maybe they would have done if they're in the office, when they just think, oh, I spoke to so-and-so, a couple of days ago, it wasn't a proper conversation, but I've seen them. Whereas now we're formalizing it a bit more. Has that made it more easy?
I think we've had to, haven't we? I think we've had to communicate much more and tried to communicate much more. And I think I wouldn't necessarily say it's made it more easy, because I'm sure we've all got endless Teams meetings in our diaries week in, week out. But it does mean we have that dedicated time with people to communicate, where we might not have in the office. I mean, or in the office or in the workspace, because when we're back in work, you can get distracted very easily, can't you? It's easy to fall back into the old ways of everything's running smoothly. But I think when we're at home, it's given us more focus to actually booking that time with people and communicate the message to them directly. So I wouldn't say it's easier.
Thank you. Mike, just before, I'm going to quickly kind of sum up in a second, but just before I do that, I want to kind of get a brief kind of summing up point from each of you, and kind of your key takeaway from what would be your top tip for creating or improving a company's compliance culture. So Mike, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, top three from me: communicate. Make sure you're clear in what you're doing. Set a plan and stick to it, and make sure you involve your workers so you can both hold each other to account. And then, as I said, get the board on board and be visible. Make sure that everyone knows it's being taken seriously.
Thank you, Chris.
I would say one of the things to take away from it is praise the positives. I know Alex spoke about it earlier on very briefly as well, but there's a lot of people pull up on the negatives, risk assessments are negatives, everything that could go wrong. So really do focus on that praise and the positives when something is right, when someone uses the right PPE, when someone is in the right place, doing the right level of training. It's really important to tell them that. People do like a little bit of a tap on the shoulder, not now, obviously social distancing, but just say, well done, you're doing it right. Again, getting the board buy-in, it's absolutely crucial for any level of safety culture. It's got to come from the top. You look at the ISO standards, it's all, top level management have to communicate that down to the team. And thirdly, look at software. It doesn't have to be us, but it's something technology now. There's some amazing things. It will save you time. It will improve that communications. That there's so much out there now that can really benefit you and everybody within your organization and the board when they see their return on investment.
Right, thank you. And finally, Alex.
I'd say empower and encouraging staff, making sure that we're sharing or empowering staff to come forward about any concerns they have, because we need them to come to us, because they're doing the job day to day. They need to share that feedback back, and that communication is so key. I'd also say back to board level buying and communication, making sure the boards are leading from the top and communicating that down to the team. And thirdly, I'm going to touch on a training point, because if you are worried about your training being a tick box exercise, and you need to make sure you've got the right quality of training in there, because if you're not delivering training where people are actually learning from it and taking something away, then it's not going to have the impact or the effect that you need it to have.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much, all. That was really interesting and useful discussion. And that's all we have time for, unfortunately, today. So thank you so much for joining us and sparing your time this afternoon. And thank you too for the audience for engaging with the session and getting your questions in. As I mentioned at the start, if you missed any of this session for any reason, or you haven't seen any of the content from the first 4 days, you can go back and check during the platform. All of the content from the shows are available on demand, as well as all of the content from the other co-located shows, and they're going to be available until the end of July. So feel free to watch that, share with colleagues, and get them to come back in if they missed the session. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Chris Fuller, Michael Brown, Alex Wilkins for their time this afternoon, and to our sponsors, iHasco. If you want to find out more about iHasco and how they can help your business, you can visit their booth and request a meeting within the meetings platform. I'm going to be back tomorrow at the slightly earlier time of 11:45 for our final live webinar of the week, where we're going to be looking at the benefits of clean air indoor and working environments. In the meantime, don't forget to check out the meetings platform and browse some of the exhibitor booths. Thank you very much for your time, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.